No. Okay, we're going to start today. We're learning Yoma Daf Nuntet. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Mitchell in honor of Oliver Mitchell on their 25th anniversary. These past 25 years have been overflowing in joy and laughter. Our five children, with our five children, thousands of Shabbos guests traveling with the family, or simply sitting together and learning the daf. It has all been a delight, and I am so grateful for each and every day. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Mazal tov. We're now going to start from yesterday's daf. I did a good review on the sheet. So if you open the sheet for today, it'll be very helpful. I did a little diagram of the directions and who goes where. So let's review where we were at. We had Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it all starts with the parochet. Was there one parochet or two parochet, right? So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he holds like Rabbi Yossi, that there was only one parochet. If there's one parochet, where does the Kohen leave? Take out the map. The Kohen leaves the Kodesh HaKodeshim, if you remember then, from the north, because the parochet, the first parochet, everyone agrees the parochet that's closer to the Kodesh HaKodeshim opens on the north. You leave the north, he goes out, he does the sprinklings on the parochet, and then he has to go, we learned this at the end of the daf, Yatzal and his back, he has to go all the way to the other side of the altar. And when he stands on the other side of the altar, then he does the sprinklings. Now, at what side is he? He's on the north. So he starts northeast. Then he starts going, counterclockwise. So he starts going counterclockwise from Tzfonit Mizrachit, and then he goes back to Dromit Maravit, right? He starts at north. Let's just do it in English. He starts at northeast. He moves west to northwest. From there, south, right? Southwest, from there, southeast. And then just remember this for later, where he's standing at the end, according to Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili will be on the south, because he started at the north, right? If you start on the north, you end at the south. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's the other way around. There were two parochot. If there were two parochot, then you exit from the south. You get first to the south corner, and then you go south again. Everyone agrees you go east, because V'yatzalam is back. You start east, you go southwest, and then you go northwest, and then you go northeast. At that point, you're going clockwise. So we had this whole question, Rabbi Akiva, how could you not go liyamin, to the right? So we started with a few answers, okay? Just to review, you can look at the chart on the sheet. Number one option was, not number one, but the first option was, maybe he disagrees with this whole concept that Rami Bar Yechezkel said that all pniyot, you go to the yamin. Maybe he doesn't agree with that. To which the Gemara rejected and said, no, it can't be. The second option is they all agree with Rami Bar Yechezkel, but Rami Bar Yechezkel, when he had that whole thing about the right and the counterclockwise, which is actually a little confusing because it's not exactly to the right. You first start to the right, then you end up kind of going, to your left. And that's because he was talking about the outer altar. When you go up the ramp, if you're going to go, right, when you have to do on the Kranot HaMizbech, where do you go? On the corners of the altar, you go first to the right. That's the first turn is right. Once you go right, where else are you going to go? Well, counterclockwise, you have to get to the other ones. So maybe he was only talking on the outer altar and not on the inner altar. And then Rabbi Akiva would say, you don't learn pnim michutz. The inner altar is something totally different. You don't learn, it's not the same issue. So there, you don't learn anything about the right. The whole Rami Bar Yechezkel didn't apply. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, no, we learn inner altar from outer altar. Just like the outer altar, you have to go to the right and counterclockwise. Likewise here, you have to go counterclockwise. So then we said, well, if Rabbi Akiva doesn't learn Pnim Michutz, so why does he have a particular order? To which we explained his particular order, and that's where we ended yesterday, has to do with this idea of Ema B'Rina Mitzvot. Don't pass up an opportunity for a mitzvah. You passed this mitzvah, right? You passed the southwest corner. Remember, when the Kohen started walking, and he left the Kodesh Kodeshim, and he went to the other side of the Mizbech, he passed by this corner. So we don't want to reject that corner, right? That corner, he has to go back to that corner right away because he passed over it, and we don't want it to look like he was just being disrespectful about a mitzvah. So he starts with southeast, and then he has to move to southwest in order to go back to the one he passed over. And then we go the other way, and then already, the order is determined based on that. So we're up to two possibilities. The first one we rejected, that they argue about Rami Bar Yechezkel's statement about the pniyot. Then we say it's just a matter of do you learn inside from outside? And then once you don't learn to the inside, then we have a different order. The order is important, but it has to do with something else. Now we're going to have a third option. We're going to have 4 options today. Fourth option is also going to be rejected. So in the end, we reject option 1 and we're going to reject option 4. Alternatively, you could say, remember there was a machloket in the Mishnah? Does the Kohen walk around and circle the altar just like he does now on the outer altar? When you go to put the blood on the 4 corners of the altar, what do you have to do? You have no choice but to walk around the altar because the altar is very large. It's 28 cubits by 28 cubits at the top space, right? The bottom space is even wider, but the top space is 28 by 28. You can't stand in one place and get to all 4 corners. You have to walk around. So the question is, do we say here that you walk around the altar? Now here the altar is only 1 cubit by 1 cubit. So theoretically, you don't need to walk around. And that's what we saw in the Mishnah. Tanakama said you walk around. Rabbi Eliezer said, he would stand in place and he would just move his finger around the different 4 corners. So now we can understand the machloket. Why? We could say, if you say, hakafa berega, you walk, Kohen walks around, then even Rabbi Akiva will agree, let's say, theoretically. If it was that you walked around, Rabbi Akiva would agree. When you walk around, it doesn't matter, outer altar, inner altar. We're going to learn the inner altar from the outer altar, right? This goes against option number 2, which was that's the whole machloket between them. Do you learn inner from outer? This one says, we'll assume you would learn outer, the inner altar from the outer altar, but Rabbi Yossi Aglili says it was hakafa beregel. You walked around, and that's why he says you have to walk counterclockwise. But Rabbi Akiva will say, no, you don't walk around. He agrees with Rabbi Eliezer. You stand in place, and he just puts his fingers in the different corners. Now, in that case, the order of Yamin is not important. It's only when you're walking that it's important, like on the outer altar. But here you're not walking. So you don't need to go. You're not doing any pniya. You're not churning. You're just moving your finger from place to place. Then you don't need that order. That's option number 3. Option number 4, and we'll come back to that option and kind of give a little bit more reason to it. So we'll come back to there in a minute. But first they're going to bring the 4th option. Even Rabbi Yossi Aglili agrees that the Kohen stands in place and just puts his finger around the 4 corners. So what's the machloket? You could probably guess this already. Mar savar yalfinan yad miregel, umar savar lo yalfinan. Rabbi Yossi Aglili will say, even though you're just doing it with your finger, we're still going to go. Every time you do anything with directions in the temple, it's always going to be to the right. So therefore, we're going to go counterclockwise order also with your hand. And Rabbi Akiva is going to say, no, if you're not moving, it has nothing to do with all these turns you do in the temple. You're not moving. So therefore, it's irrelevant. And that's the machloket according to the 4th option. However, as I told you, we're going to reject this because something doesn't jive here with our Mishnah. Remember our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said there were 2 opinions. What were the 2 opinions, right? Then we added this third Rabbi Akiva's opinion, which didn't appear in the Mishnah. The Mishnah gave 2 opinions. They each related actually to different things. One related to the directions. From where does he start? From the Mizrachit Tzfonit, from the northeast corner. Then he goes Tzfonit Maravit, Maravit Dromit, Dromit Mizrachit, right? He goes in his counterclockwise order. It doesn't say Rabbi Yossi Aglili in the Mishnah, but this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Then it says, skipping a line, then after that it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bimkomo Hayamer. Rabbi Eliezer comes and disagrees and says, no, he didn't walk around, he stood in place. Now to say that Rabbi Akiva looks like Rabbi Eliezer works because Rabbi Akiva doesn't appear in our Mishnah, but to say that Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who appears in the Mishnah, again, he doesn't appear by name, but his opinion is there that it's all from the north. It can't be, and as it's clear, there's a disagreement between Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer about whether you walk around or whether you stand in place. So therefore, they're going to say, let's read it inside. Could he possibly hold that the Kohen just stands in place and moves his finger around? It says at the end there, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bimkomo haya omed, umechateh. So the fact that Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says he was standing in his place, michlal de Tanakama lo sfirale. It seems clear that Tanakama doesn't hold that. And then assuming, right, it's an assumption, but we would assume that Tanakama is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Therefore, Rabbi Yosef Glili must hold that you actually walk around, because there's a clear debate of that in the Mishnah. Therefore, therefore, they go back to option number 3. Even though there was also option number 2, they seem to prefer option number 3, which was it must be like we said before, mar savar hakafa biyad umar savar hakafa beregel. So eat, right? One holds, Rabbi Akiva holds, the coin stands in place, like Rabbi Eliezer. And then the question is just, where does he start? He starts on the south side instead of the north side, and goes, right, again, northeast, where he's standing, then northwest, southeast where he's standing, southwest, right, then northwest, and northeast, which is clockwise order. And Mar Savar kafa beregel. And Rabbi Yosef Glili says, no, he's going around with his feet, and therefore he has to start liyamin. Ibait Ema. Now, this Ibait Ema sounds like it's bringing another option, but it's not. Ibait Ema here, some people actually take the words out. And what this is really coming to do, I told you we get back to this, which is explaining the machloket, hakafa beregel, hakafa biyad. What's the logic of each one? The hakamiflige. This is the root of their machloket, if you assume it's hakafa biyad or hakafa beregel. Mar savar saviv de mizbeach pnimi kisaviv de mizbeach hachitzon. When it says go around the altar, right? You have to do it saviv. What does it mean around the altar? Well, saviv appears by the outer altar, and saviv appears by the inner altar. Again, saviv is to go around. So the saviv of the inner must be just like the saviv of the outer. Now, just like the saviv of the outer, you actually physically walk around from corner to corner. Likewise, here you're going to walk from corner to corner. That's Rabbi Yosef Glili. Umar savar kule mizbeach pnimi bimkom chada keren de mizbeach chitzon. Now he points out something very interesting about the measurements. As I said, the big altar is 28 by 28. This altar is 1 by 1 cubit, much, much smaller. If you go to the big altar, there's these 4 corners of the altar. Each corner takes up a space of 1 by 1 square cubit. If that's the case, what he says is the whole entire Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar inside the Mizbeach HaKtoret, the incense altar that we're discussing, that entire altar is the size of each corner of the altar, the big altar, which means now when the Kohen goes, he walks around from corner to corner. But when he's at each corner and he does the sprinkling of the blood, he stays in place. Even if he's doing it, if you remember, we talked about matnot shtayin shehin arba. He might do 2 placings, which are really 4, because he'll put the blood on the corner there on both sides, right? Let's say he's standing at the first corner, Drom Mizrach. Okay, he's at the southeast. He puts the blood on the corner where it's actually on both sides. And when he does that, he doesn't walk around from one to the other. He stands in place. So likewise, says Rabbi Akiva, he stands in place here because this is not compared altar to altar. It's altar to Keren. This is just like one of the corners of the other Mizbeach. And just like there, you stand in place. Likewise, here, you're going to stand in place. Okay, that's what he says. So now that's the root. So before we move on, let's just do a quick review of what we saw. Machloket Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yosef Glili, do you start from the north, or do you, Rabbi Yosef Glili, or do you start from the south, which was, we said, was all based on, was it 1 parochet or 2 parachot in terms of where is he actually exiting from? Then we said, what's really the root of their machloket? It's true, it starts at the parochet, but that would only give you the first spot. But then what about where he goes from there in the direction? So either they disagree about whether you have to always go liyamin. We rejected that. They all agree about that. They just disagree about, do we learn, that's all for the outer altar. Do we learn the same thing for the inner altar? Or alternatively, do we not walk around the altar? The machloket is, do we walk around or do we stay in place? If we stay in place, then the order again is no longer important according to Rabbi Akiva. Or do we say they all think it's hakafa biyad? And the question is, when you do it biyad and you stand in place and you go in order, is the order still going to be always go liyamin, or is it not? That one we rejected also, but that was the 4th possibility. And then we gave a reason to the 3rd option, which was the machloka between whether we say it's hakafa biyad or hakafa beregel. Do we learn saviv from the outer altar, or do we say this is more like the Keren, and by the Keren and the outer altar, the Kohen stands in place. Likewise, here he'll stand in place. One last thing about this before we move on to the next part. Tanya, there's a braita that says, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, Shnei Kohanim Gdolim nishtayru b'mikdash rishon. There were two Kohanim Gedolim that remained after the first temple was destroyed. And when the second temple was rebuilt, they were still around. Some people say this couldn't be talking about Bayit Rishon, can't possibly be. It must be talking about Bayit Sheni, and it must be a mistake here. Take out Rishon, put in Sheni, that we're talking about after the second temple period of time, which is the time the Tanaim are living. There were two Kohanim Gedolim left over, right? There's questions, how could there be two Kohanim Gedolim? Wasn't it, they died before the next one came over, especially in Bayit Rishon times. So some people say maybe they had both worked in the temple because one got impure one day and he kind of came in his place on Yom Kippur. Maybe that's why. There's all sorts of questions asked about this. The best and most interesting question in my mind is, we're going to see there's a debate between these two Kohanim, and people are going to say, wait, isn't it known that until the time of the Zugot, right, which is before Hillel and Shammai were one of the Zugot, right, and there were all these pairs before them, that until that time, which is, more toward the end of the Second Temple period, there were no machlokot. There weren't disagreements. They always agreed about everything. And it was only later, and that's why the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah started to be written down, because there were all these debates. Weren't there no debates before, right? It's a good question about how literally you take that. Were there really no debates? And someone will say, if there were no debates, how could these two Kohanim have debated this issue? And then they grapple with it, which I think is fascinating. It's hard to imagine Judaism without debates, right? It's what we're all about, is debates and different opinions. Is it really possible there was this idyllic time? Again, whether you look at that as idyllic or not is also a question. But this idyllic time, there were no debates. It's a good question, but some people take things very literally. I don't know that it's always meant to be understood so literally. Anyway, that's an interesting aside. There's a lot of asides to today's stuff. Let's get back to our topic. So each one testifies, I went around with my hand, I stood in place, and I just did my hand. I went around with my feet, I walked around. So each one testifies about something different. Each one gave a reason, which is the one we already saw. The first one said, I did it beregel. It was the second one who said that. But I did it beregel. I walked around because I learned saviv from the other altar. Right, that entire altar fits into the size of one corner of the altar, and by the one corner the Kohen would stand. Likewise here, the Kohen would stand. Okay, that's enough for that topic. Now we finished with, so remember, let's just keep reviewing so that we really, really have this down pat. Kohen starts off, he does, right? And I want you to get this all down pat because it's one of those things that no one really ever remembers. So I figure if we keep going over it, you'll remember it. So Kohen goes inside Kodesh Kodeshim, he sprinkles with the Dama Par, 1 above, 7 below. Then he goes back out, he slaughters the Seir. He hasn't even slaughtered the Seir yet, right? The goat. Then after he slaughters the goat, he brings the blood in and he does 1 lamala, 7 lamata, right? This is all toward the kaporet on the Aron. Then he goes out, again, whether he exits from the north or exits from the south, debate, depending on whether it was 1 parochet or 2. He's standing either a little more toward the north or a little more toward the south, and he starts spraying toward, right? He sprinkles the blood toward the parochet. He's standing right in front of the parochet or somewhere between the altar and the parochet. He sprinkles 1 lamala, 7 lamata of each of the bloods, one after the other, just like he did inside. Then he walks to the other side of the altar, to the eastern side, right? He passes the altar entirely. And now he mixes the blood together, or we saw an opinion he actually doesn't mix the bloods. And so he either does 4 on the 4 corners once, or he does it twice, either with a mixture of both bloods, or he does the par and then the seir. And then now comes the last sprinkling. Now he stands in place, and we're going to see what place is he standing. Well, depending on where he started is going to affect where he ends. If he started on the southeast, he's now going to be on the northeast. If he started on the northeast, he's now going to be on the southeast, because, right, either you're going that way or you're going that way, right? But he's going to end up on the opposite corner where he started. And he stands there, and he's now going to sprinkle blood on the top of the altar. I mentioned yesterday, how could he, by the way, in general, the sprinklings, when he does it biyad in the previous, how does he do that if there's all this fire burning, right? So today we're going to see something interesting about that. Although I just realized it doesn't really resolve it, because he only does it before this point. He doesn't do it. Anyway, okay, we'll get to that when we get there. Matnitimani. So who does our, now the other point they mentioned was, When he does the 4 sprinklings, oh, sorry, I jumped the gun. We're not yet up to the top of the altar. My mistake. We're now on Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that he stands in place and does it with his fingers, right? Okay, we're up to that, which we already kind of discussed. But then what Rabbi Eliezer said is, if you remember this, what direction does he go? He takes his finger and he moves the blood upward, right? He moves his finger up with the blood, except for the one corner where he's standing, where we don't do it that way. We do it facing down. Takes his blood, puts the blood at the top corner and puts his finger going in a downward motion. Now, why is this? So we said it so we don't want to get his clothes dirty, right? So now, Matnitiman. So Medina, I see you're asking, we're inside where? We're inside the Hechal, in the sanctuary, standing by the Mizbeach HaZahav. That was what we learned yesterday. What Mizbeach is Lifnei Hashem, right? You might have thought it's where we go to the outer altar. No, it's in the sanctuary. All these sprinklings are done in the sanctuary, but not in the Kodesh Kodeshim anymore. We're done with that. Matnitimani. So who's the Mishnah according to? Rabbi Yehudahi. We're going to see there's a debate about Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. There's Rabbi Meir's opinion and Rabbi Yehuda's opinion about the direction of the bloods. Do we go down? Do we go in a downward motion or do we go in an upward motion? No matter what, we're going to have 3 are done one way and 1 is done differently. The question is, right? We have in our Mishnah, 3 go upward because we're not worried about his clothes getting dirty, and only the 1 right where he's standing goes downward. But we're going to see there's a different opinion. Tanya. It says in the following brayta, Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. In other words, Rabbi Meir is explaining Rabbi Eliezer's opinion according to his understanding. The Rabbi Eliezer Omer b'mkomo omenu mechatei, va'al kulam hu haya noten mimala lamata. All of them go downward. Chutz me'ota sheba'alachson shenoten mimata lamala. As I said, where is he standing now? Right, wherever. Okay, so in the beginning he stands. Okay, we don't know what Rabbi Eliezer holds. But either, whichever side he came out of from the Kodesh Kodeshim, that's the side of the altar he's going to be standing on. And when he's standing more to one corner. He's not standing in the center. He's standing near one of the corners, either southeast or northeast. When he stands there, he's got 4 corners to do. 1 is the one right in front of him. 2 are next to him. And 1 is a diagonal across from him. That's the farthest. Rabbi Meir says that Rabbi Eliezer holds that only the farthest one you do going upward, because the ones that are close, remember, it's only 1 cubit away. You still have danger of it spraying on your clothing. So all 3 that are closest to him, he has to go downward. So kulan hu noten mimata lamali, he goes downward. Chutz mizo, which is, sorry, I read the wrong one. Each one he goes downward, except for the one Shabbalachson, the one diagonally across. That one goes upward. That one you could go upward because you're not worried about it getting on the clothes. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, which is what appears in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer stands in place. All of them go down to up. Other than the one that's right in front of him. That's the only one he does downward. So that his clothes don't get dirty. Here we finally see it explicitly. We didn't see it inside before. Here it says that's the concern, that the clothes are going to get dirty. Okay. So now we're done. So now we dealt with the issue of which direction does he go and where does he start from. We dealt with which direction of up and down does he sprinkle the blood. Does he put the blood on the altar? We now see 2 different approaches to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. If he stands in one place and does it, right? Obviously, if he's going around from corner to corner, he's always going to have to go down because there's always a concern it's going to spray on his clothes. The question, if he stands in place, are we worried about the 2 that are near him also, or only about the one that's in front of him? Now he's Now we get to the part where he puts it on the Taharosh Mizbeach. Now I already explained what Taharosh Mizbeach is, but we don't really know what that means yet. So let's forget about what I said and let's start from scratch. My taharo, what does it mean, taharo? What does that word come from? We're going to now deal with etymology of the word. Amar Rabba Bar Shila, palge de mizbeach. It means the midpoint of the altar, which means that you're standing next to the altar. You basically sprinkle the blood onto the side of the altar at the midpoint, mid-height. Okay, we're not talking about on the base of the altar at the top. We're talking about on the side of the altar toward the middle point of the altar. How do we know this? As people say, tahar tiara, that means afternoon is here. What does it mean, tahar tiara? Have palgadiyoma, it means midday. Right? We've reached midday. So tiara must be middle. So therefore, middle of the altar. But the Gemara brings a source that seems to contradict this. Meitive, kishehu mazeh, eno mazeh lo agabei efel. Now, this is what I was talking about before. When you sprinkle, I was worried about all the smoke and everything, right? And the heat. But it says here, kishehu mazeh, eno mazeh ala efer. You don't do it on the ashes. You don't sprinkle it on where there's a pile of ashes or on where there's a pile of coals. What do? You stoke the coals to the side. Okay, you move them, not stoke them. You move them. You sweep them to the side. And then you sprinkle. So now we understand why he's not going to burn himself, because you make sure that everything's aside before you do anything. And then you do the sprinkling. Now, why is this not exactly perfect? Because here we're talking about the sprinkling on the center. It sounds like before you didn't necessarily do this, but maybe this is of the opinion that you walk around the altar and then you wouldn't really need to worry about the coals in the middle. But if you hold by Rabbi Eliezer, then I would assume you would do this beforehand. You would move all the coals to the side before you're going to start putting your hand over the altar and over the smoke and the fire. Anyway, the point is, if you were doing it on mid-height of the altar, you would have no need to push the coals aside because it doesn't affect you in any way. So therefore, it must not be on the side of the altar. So he changes his mind and he says, on the revealed part of the altar, meaning on the top, on the base of the altar, top of the altar. Now, how do we get that from taharo? Etzem hashamayim laTorah means it's clear like the bright, like the clearest sun, okay? Like as clear as the sun is. Tiara means clear and clean. So now they understand, again, it's not like top means clean, but the point is the top part gets cleared off and then it's on the clean part of the top part of the altar, and therefore it must mean that's what it is. Now the question is, where is he standing when he does this? North side, south side. So he's obviously on the east, because remember, he started. Now, this is all going to depend on where he starts from, which all goes back to how many parochot there were. Okay, so we're going to do this inside in a second. Hananya omer b'tzad tzfoni hu noten. He's standing on the north side of the altar now. Rabbi Yossi omer b'tzad dromi hu noten. He's standing on the south side. B'mai kamiflage. What's the root of their machloket? Mar savar pitcha b'darom kai. Umar savar pitcha b'tzafon kai. You say, oh, it all goes back to that parochet debate. Okay, if you say, again, we have one parochet or two parochot. If you say the petach is on the tzafon, that's Rabbi Yossi, right? The opening is on the north because there's only one parochet. So he goes out from the north. Again, what does he do? First, he does the sprinkling on the parochet. Then he goes to the other side of the altar. He starts on the north side. If he starts on the north, he goes, right, north. He goes westward. He goes south. He goes back eastward. And where does he end? On the south side. So that's why these sprinklings are done, according to Rabbi Yossi, on the south. And I don't really need to show you, but obviously, if you think that the exit from the Kodesh Kodeshim is on the south side, then he's going to end up on the south side when he does his sprinklings on the altar, go all the way around. He's going to end up on the north. That's Rabbi Hananya, who says he's now standing at the north. The point is, wherever you are, that's where, right, wherever you finished the placings of the blood on the corners, wherever you were done, that's where you do these sprinklings. So now the Gemara is going to ask that. Everyone agrees, right? Everyone agrees that wherever you finish the matanot, again, right, there's a difference between sprinklings, that's the mazeh, where you sprinkle all the time. The four corners, you place it because you put your finger and you either go down or you go up, but it's called a matana, a placement, not a gift, but to give, to place. So now, right from latte, to give. So now, wherever you finish the matanot, that's where you start on the roof of the altar. So now they say, why does everyone agree about that? My timer, where did they all get it from? Why is that so obvious to them? Amalka, right? What would you have thought? I would have thought you stand in the center, but you would have just gone to the middle, but you don't. Where do we get this from? Amalka v'tiaro v'kidsho. This is the verse that discusses those sprinklings, and it says v'tiaro v'kidsho. So what do they say? Tiaro is a reference to this sprinkling because you do it al tal rosh mizbeach, and kidsho is a reference to the matanot that you already did. So they say Makom shekidsho sham tiaro. Why do they make reference to the matnot in the word kidsho? To tell you, tiaro v'kidsho, these go together. Wherever you finish doing the kiddush, which was the putting of the blood, that which is kind of sanctified, that's where you do the tiaro. That's where you sprinkle the blood on the top of the altar. And therefore, everybody agrees about that point. Now we're getting to, you finish that. What are you left with? Well, this is the only thing he does outside the Heichal, outside the sanctuary and the Kodesh Kodeshim. Right now, he goes all the way out to the big Mizbeach, and he puts it in the Yesod. Remember, whatever's left of the blood that he hasn't yet used, right? You wonder how much, there was obviously a lot of blood, but he did a lot of sprinklings, more than normal. But whatever he has left gets poured into the Yesod. Now, what do we see in the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, Sheirei Adam, haya shofech hayesod ma'aravi shel mizbeach hachitzon. As I told you yesterday, and I'll tell you this again, there's a debate about how exactly this looks. So if you look at this map from the Mechon HaMikdash, so in the Yesod, here's the Yesod. So the Yesod is this, it's actually green. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but there's a green line on the north side, and there's a green line on the west side. Now at the west, at the bottom, there's these two dots. Okay, now here it looks like it's just one straight line down on two sides, right? Two straight lines, and that's it. And the Dromi one is the one that's more to the south, and the Maravi one is the one that's more to the north. Okay, they wouldn't call it Tzfoni because it's not really Tzafon. It's really in the south and southward, but it's just north of the south one, so they call it Maravi. But according to other commentaries, there was a little piece of the Yesod that jutted out a little bit on the south side. It was like 1 cubit that jutted out. There was the whole of the Yesod that they call the Yesod Dromi, and that's why it's called Dromi Maravi. It makes more sense actually by their names. Maravi, it's on the Maravi side, and the Dromi is on the Dromi side because there is this little bit that jutted out to the Dahom. Okay, the problem is that most of the sources say it was only on the north and the west. So to all of a sudden say that it was also on the south is a little bit complicated. But that's how they explain. So now, according to what we saw in the Mishnah, the blood here is put in the western hole, as opposed to regular sacrifices that are done on the outer altar where they go in the southern hole. We're going to see a few different opinions about this, okay? Our Mishnah is not the only opinion. So first they explain why. Tamar ka ve'et kol dama par yishpoch. There's a few different ways to read this Gemara. I'm going to read it in 2 different ways. The pasuk says, "Et kol dama par yishpoch." This is, by the way, in Vayikra Daled, when it's talking about the other chataot that you do inside, not the par. But they learn from here because it says, "Kol dam hapal." Hapar must be including other par, not just the par lim davar shel tzibor, right? When the whole tzibor has to bring one, but also the par Yoma Kippurim. So whatever's true for this is going to be true for ours. And what does it say? It says, "Et kol dama par yishpoch." You're supposed to spill it all. Now they don't quote you the rest of the pasuk, but the rest of the pasuk is what's important. Okay, you have to read the rest of the verse. The rest of the verse is Asher Petach Ol Moed. Okay, you're supposed to do it the Yesod Mizbeach, which is opposite the exit of Ol Moed. Now, look at our map. When you go out of Ol Moed and you go to the altar, you're kind of at the north side of the altar. You go down toward the south. What do you hit first? The first hole you're going to hit is the one that's less south, which is the one that's called the Ma'aravi. So that's the one you're going to hit first. So that's where you're going to go. Okay, and therefore, that's the one he hits first when he gets there. Okay, so because of that, that's the one that's Petach Ol Moed. Now, some people don't have the words v'chinafik b'hu paga b'reisha, and it's because we're really trying to say it's Asher Petach Ol Moed. It's right opposite the entrance. It doesn't really matter which one you get to first. The point is that's opposite the entrance. Now, the outer altar, any blood, any kind of sacrifices that are done on the outer altar, like a regular sin offering, let's say, for example, is done there. What do you do with the remainder of the blood? You pour it on the other hole. That's what we saw. They were different. But Tanu Rabbanan, we're going to see a braita about this. Yesod Mizbeach. So when it talks about the regular sacrifices, it says, pour it in the Yesod Mizbeach, not the ones that are done on the inside. Ze Yesod Dromit. This means the southern one. So now they say, right, there's a classic Braita Midrash Halacha structure. Is that really so? Ataomer Yesod Dromit. Oh, Eino Ele Yesod Malchavit. Now, where do you get that from? You could say, it says Yesod. It didn't say Yesod southern one. It didn't say western ones. How do you know which one it is? Amar Yoma Yiridato min hakevesh liyetziato min ha'eichal. Well, where does it say it explicitly? We're going to assume that by us, we already learned that it says Asher Petach Ol Moed. That means the one you get to first. Since it says it there clearly, we're going to learn the same thing here, which is just like Ma Yitziato Min Ha'echal B'Samuch Lo, you do it in the hole you get to first. This is similar to where we ended yesterday with Ema V'Yirin Al HaMitzvot. The first thing you get to, that's where you do it. So it's obviously going to be different when you get down the ramp of the altar, which one you're going to hit first. Then when you exit the Heichal and you get out from the Ulam, the first one you hit is going to be the one that's more to the north. But when you go off the ramp, right? Remember, you went up the ramp from the south, you turned right to the east, you go all the way around, you end up on the west, you go down the ramp, and then you walk on a diagonal toward the Yesod. Now, the first one you're going to get to, since the ramp ends all the way on the southern side, when you go toward there, you're going to hit the southern one before you hit the one that's right north of it. So therefore, we're going to learn the logic from one to the other. There you hit the southern one first. You're going to do the southern one first. You're going to do the southern one. That's where they learn. Right? So and which one is that? When you're inside and you leave the sanctuary, the first one you're going to hit is the western one. So that's how we get to the two different ones. However, we're going to see two different explanations now, two different opinions. Not like our Mishnah. According to Rabbi Yishmael, they're both done on the western one. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, they're both done on the southern one. So now they say, Bishlama Rabbi Yishmael, Kasavar Yomad Satumi Meforash. I understand Rabbi Yishmael's position. Rabbi Yishmael says they're both done Yisod Ma'aravi. Why is that? Well, one place in the Torah tells you where to do it, which is Petach Ol Moed, which is Ma'aravi. The other place, it just says throw it in the Yisod. We don't know which Yisod. So we'll learn a place where it doesn't explain it, we'll learn it from a place where it is said explicitly. So if there it's Ma'aravi, it must be here, it's the same one. That's an approach. Ela Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, my time, but why does he say they're both in the Dromi? I don't get that at all. So the Amar Rabbi Ashi, Kasavar Pitra B'Darom Kai. When you leave Ol Moed, now you might remember this, I'm not going to get into all the details, but if you remember, there was a debate about where the Mizbeach is. Is it more in the north? Is it all in the south? Is it partly in the north? How partly in the north? So some people hold that the whole base is in the north, which means that when you exit the Heichal, you're actually going to be opposite the southern one because the whole rest of it is in the north side. So therefore, we're going to say he must have the Mizbeach in a different place. And that's why when you leave Ol Moed, the first thing you're going to get to is the Darom one. And that's how he gets to Darom, and then he learns Darom to both. Now we have this last interesting line, which if you want to delve into it more, you can listen to Gefet this week. It's coming out later today on the Hebrew side of our site. Rabbi Chana Dreyfus discussed this in depth. I skipped the first word. Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael b'debei Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. We have this debate between them. Is it Ma'aravi? Is it Dromi? Well, in the end, the debate Rabbi Yishmael, the house of Rabbi Yishmael, ended up being convinced by Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and agreed in the end that both of them are in the Darom one. Yisod Dromit. V'simanech, and how do you remember this? And this is what the whole Gefet is all about, and this Tosfot. The siman the way you remember this is Mishachua Gavre Legavre. More people grab one person, right? You have a tug of war. Who's going to win if you have a lot of people versus one person? Obviously, the more people are going to pull the single person. That's how you remember this. Now, that's a very strange thing because that's how you remember that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's people convinced Rabbi Yishmael's people. There's people, right? They're both Rabbim. That's not really a good mnemonic device. Didn't really help. So there's a whole debate about what the nusach is. Is it actually gavre legavre? Is it one person pulled many people? And that's how you remember, which is a bit strange because that's not something that's logical. Right? You want to remember by things that you remember. You wouldn't really remember one person pulls many people. And why is one many and one single, right? Some people say it's because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has two names, Shimon, and his father is Yochai. And Rabbi Yishmael is only mentioned without his father's name. And that's why maybe you remember the Gavre is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai pulled Rabbi Yishmael. There's a whole debate in Tosfot about this. And the title of Gefet is really, how do people remember things? It's like an interesting thing to delve into. Okay, but moving on, because we want to finish the daf. Now, once they go down the Yisod, what happens to them? Right? It's interesting. They tell you, like, you might not care. Okay, we threw it in the hole. We're done. But what happens to it? It goes out into this channel on the ground in the temple. They go out to Nachal Kidron. In other words, Elu ve'elu, both the extra of the dam and the extra of the seir, go out to Nachal Kidron, and then you can sell them for fertilizer. And there's a din of Me'ila. If you don't buy them, someone doesn't purchase them and remove the Kedusha from it, they still have sanctity, and there's a din of misuse of consecrated property. To which the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, this is a subject of debate actually. Mo'alim b'damim divrei Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Shimon. V'chachamim omrim ein mo'alim b'hem. Is it Me'ila or is it not Me'ila? There's a machloket. Okay? Some people say there isn't any problem with misuse of consecrated property. So now the Gemara tells us, Ad kan lo pligi elamid Rabbanan. This whole debate, is there Me'ila or not, is only on a rabbinic level. Nobody thinks there's Me'ila on a Doraita level. Why? First of all, the mitzvah was already done. Once a mitzvah is done, there's usually no law of Me'ila. We're going to talk about that more in tomorrow's daf. What's the difference if it's rabbinic or a Torah? So first of all, by the Torah, if you misuse consecrated property accidentally, Me'ila is all accidental, what will happen? You have to bring the value of it, the keren, which you also have to do if it's Rabbanan. But the next two things are only if they're Torah. Then you have to add an extra chomesh, a fifth, which is really a quarter of the value, to add additionally. And you have to bring a sacrifice, a korban hasham. If it's only rabbinic, you don't have to do either of those two things. You just have to return the value of what you used. So now why is that? Everyone agrees that on a Torah level, there's no Me'ila. Why is that? Minani mile. Amar ula, amar ka. We're going to have three different answers, and it's all going to be derived from this one verse. Okay, I brought the verse on the sheet. The verse is Vayikra Yud Zayin Pasuk Yud Aleph. It's all about blood. Ki nefesh habasar badamhu. Right, the soul is in the blood. V'ani netativ lachem. I gave it to you. First, we're going to darshan that word lachem to you. Ala mizbeach lechaper, for you to put it on the altar to atone. The next word we're going to darshan is to atone. The second opinion. Al nafshotechem, to atone for your souls. Ki adamu b'nefesh yechaper, because the blood has the power to atone. Okay, for the nefesh. The third word we're going to darshan is who. You could have just said ki adam b'nefesh yechaper. Why it say who? It. Okay, we're going to darshan that word. So three reasons how we know the blood on a Torah level doesn't have me'ila to it. Why is that? Amar ula amar ka lachem shelachem yehe. When it says the dam ani netativ lachem, I gave it to you, God says. What does it mean I gave it to you? It means it's yours fully. If it's yours, it's not hekdesh, it's not sanctified. There's no laws of me'ila. Number two, debei Rabbi Ishmael Tana, debei Rabbi Shimon Tana, sorry. In the house of Rabbi Shimon, they said, lechaper lechapara netativ v'lo lemila. This one I have more trouble understanding. I gave it to you to atone for, which means it's for atonement purposes, but it's not for me'ila. I didn't give it to you to be sanctified, I guess is the idea. It's not holy. It's just for atonement purposes, so therefore it's not sanctified. The Rabbi Yochanan Amal Ka, who, he darshans this word who. Now, who seems to imply its status is always the same, doesn't change its status. So therefore, lifnei kapara kalachar kapara. So even before you achieve atonement, it's going to be treated like after you achieve atonement. So even before you get atonement, it's also not going to be a din of me'ila midoraita. Why? Malachar kapara ein bo me'ila. Just like after you receive atonement, certainly there's no me'ila, which we're going to see why in a second. Actually, they don't say it inside, so I'll tell you already, which is after you receive atonement, that's something. It's what I said before. You've already fulfilled the mitzvah through it, so there's not going to be a law of me'ila. So therefore, since it says who, it's always going to be the same as status. If after you receive atonement, there's no me'ila, then even before you receive atonement, there's no me'ila. So now the Gemara questions that and says, why don't you just say, if it has the same status, why don't you say the reverse? Before you receive atonement, it's going to be sanctified. So therefore, even after you receive atonement, maybe it'll retain its status and still be. Normally, right, the animal, once you slaughter it, right, before you sacrifice, there's usually, again, it depends on which sacrifice, but before you finish the process, usually it has me'ila. So why don't we say the status remains that it was in the beginning? So malifnei kapara yesh bo me'ila, even lachar kapara should have still me'ila. So they say, it's because we said before, ein lecha davar shenaseh mitzvato mo'alim bo. There's no such thing. Okay, we're going to see, is this really true? That's going to be the next question. Is there really no such thing? But there's no such thing that you finish the mitzvah and you still have me'ila. In other words, once the mitzvah is done, it's finished. The level of sanctity clearly drops because you've done what's done and it's done. Therefore, it's not going to have me'ila. So what we saw here is that Number one, there's a machloket about whether mo'alim bahem after atonement. And there's a machloket there about whether there is me'ilah or not. But everyone agrees that certainly on a doraita level, there's no me'ilah. And that's also because even before you receive atonement, there's no me'ilah in blood on a doraita level. And it will only be d'Rabbanan. There's actually a debate about whether this me'ilah d'Rabbanan is only after you receive atonement or it's even before. Some people say, comes up in Tosfot, that in the temple, we don't have gzerot d'Rabbanan. We don't add extra stringencies. So therefore, this me'ilah d'Rabbanan would only be after, once it goes out to Nachal Kidron, and not before. Some people say, oh no, maybe it's inside, it's also d'Rabbanan, but what they're talking about is even outside, it's d'Rabbanan. And the idea here also is that if it were really sanctified on the doraita level, you wouldn't be able to redeem it. This whole thing of being able to buy and use it for fertilizer, you can only redeem things that don't have what we call kedushat haguf. They're not sanctified the body of it, right? Which would mean there's no me'ilah. If only its value is, well, then you can remove the value onto something else and pay the money and then remove the sanctity. So that also goes well with explaining our Mishnah as to why you can actually buy this, and yet there's a law of me'ilah because me'ilah is only on a rabbinic level. But this will stop for today. And as I said, tomorrow we're going to question this whole assumption. Is there really nothing that you do the mitzvah and it doesn't have me'ilah? Maybe there's something that does have me'ilah even after you did the mitzvah. Have a great day, everyone.